All right, welcome back to our daily read aloud, The Wild Robot. Yesterday, I think we got through 5 chapters. Yep, we did. And very basically, how did Roz get on the island to begin with, our robot? Noah?
He fell off board because the ship turned over, right? And he got, people got pulled onto that island, and all the other robots got broken into pieces, but he got flung off into a cliff.
Yes. So the box was lifted, settled on a cliff, and who actually turned the robot on? Josiah?
The otters, and I started reading the second book.
Okay, good. So the otters turned him on, and they probably got really freaked out. They've never seen a robot. He popped out of his crate, kind of like hatching.
Her.
Well, I don't know that it's given it... Did it tell us it's a her?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't want to give anything away. So, Razum, whatever her name was, she gave some numbers. Razum unit, something.
1,785.
Okay. 1785. She is a girl, and the last thing that happened, she saw that if I don't get away from the ocean, these waves are going to batter me and cause me to be in the robot graveyard. So, she's deciding to climb a cliff. And the last thing we said, do you think she'll be able to do it? Half the class said probably. Half the class said she might have to find a different idea. So we will see. Chapter 6 is called The Climb. Crack, thunk, clang. Wait, first of all, what type of figurative language is that? Zoe? It's the long word with an O.
Onomatopoeia.
Onomatopoeia, nice job. Roz was having a little trouble climbing the cliffs. She had a new dent on her rear and a long scrape down her side. And she was just about to get another ding when a crab scuttled out from under a piece of driftwood. The crab looked up and immediately showed off his giant claws. Everyone was afraid of his claws, but not the robot. She just looked down and introduced herself. "Hello, crab. My name is Roz." After a brief standoff, the crab cautiously backed away. And that's when Roz realized how easily he moved over the rocks. With his side stance and his grippy feet, the crab could crawl up and down any rock surface. So, Roz decided to try out his climbing technique. She spread her arms wide and clamped each of her hands onto the cliffside. She jammed one foot into a crack and lifted her other foot onto a narrow ledge, and just like that, she was climbing. Roz moved awkwardly at first. A chunk of rock crumbled in her hand, and she had trouble finding footholds. But as she climbed higher and higher, she started to get the hang of it. Seagulls squawked from their cliff nests and soared away when the robot came too close. But Roz paid them no mind. She was focused only on getting to the top. Up and up and up she went, methodically climbing past nests and ledges and tiny trees rooted in the cracks. And before long, our robot felt the soft soil of the island beneath her feet. All right, friends at home, here's the picture. And unless it's very detailed, I'm just going to give you a wide show, okay? These pictures aren't super detailed, but they are very nice. So I will say, remember that our author and illustrator is the same person. So the writer illustrated his own pictures, which I think would be very fun. I would love to do something like that. Chapter 7, The Wilderness. Animal sounds filled the forest. Chirps and wing beats and rustlings in the underbrush. And then, from the sea cliffs, there came new sounds. Heavy, crunching footsteps. The forest animals fell silent, and from their hiding places they watched as a sparkling monster stomped past. But the forest was not a comfortable place for Roz. Jagged rocks and fallen trees and tangled underbrush made it difficult for her to walk. She stumbled along, struggling to keep her balance, until her foot snagged and she toppled over like a piece of timber. It wasn't a bad fall. No dings, no dents, just dirt. But Roz was programmed to keep herself in good working order. And once she was back on her feet, she immediately began cleaning herself off. Her hands darted around her body, quickly brushing and picking off every speck of dirt. Only when the robot was sparkling again did she continue through the forest. Do you think that's going to cause her issues if she lives in the woods? Can you stay perfectly clean all the time if you're outside? No. So she might have to get over that. Roz stumbled on until she found a patch of ground that was flat and open and carpeted with pine needles. It seemed like a safe place. And safety was all the robot really wanted. So she stood there motionless, all perfect lines and angles set against the irregular shapes of the wilderness. Chapter 8, Okay, now this chapter starts to get funny. A lot of this book is funny, so if you're thinking it is, you're right.
Like silly and stuff?
Yeah, it's a little bit. Pine cones is the name of this chapter. Now, where did she just stand herself on top of? Abby?
Pine needle.
So, what we're about to read called pine cones. Any predictions what could happen? Eric?
She'll eat pine cones.
Could be. Cadence?
She's gonna walk in this place where there's tons of pine trees, and then the pine cones are all gonna fall on her.
Okay. I'll take one more prediction. Madeline?
Oh, the same with Cadence.
Okay, let's find out. The pine cones. If you stand in a forest long enough, eventually something will fall on you. Okay, and I will tell you from my experience, that is true. And Roz had been standing in the forest long enough. A gentle wind whispered through the treetops, and then, thunk, a pine cone bounced off her head. The robot looked down and watched the pine cone roll to a stop. It seemed harmless, so Roz went right back to doing nothing. A few hours later, a gust of wind rushed through the treetops, and then, thunk, the robot looked down as another pine cone rolled away. And then, a few hours after that, a howling wind tore through the treetops. It bent trunks and shook branches, and then, thunk, 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 pine cones began raining down. Thunk, thunk. Rose felt something like annoyance. Thunk. She quickly scanned the area for somewhere safe from pine cones, and she spotted the perfect place when she looked up at the huge rocky shape that towered above the forest. Now, she said she felt something like annoyance. So, in this whole book, we'll keep talking about how she feels. Can robots have feelings?
Yes. No. I told you it's hard for me.
It is hard. We're practicing, okay? Emma, what do you think?
No.
No. That's how I've generally thought about robots, right? They're like a computer, very smart, but they don't really have feelings. But she just said, I'm feeling something like annoyance with these pine cones. Liam?
Like a computer is technically a robot.
Right. So if I did this to my computer, I'm just tapping at people at home. Is my computer going to be annoyed with me?
No.
No. Right? If I say my computer's annoyed, I'm personifying it, right? I'm giving it a human trait. Madeline?
But what if you ask your Alexa how she's feeling?
That's true. So are robots becoming a little bit different than maybe we've thought about them in the past?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, we got to keep going.
Does Roz look like a human?
Well, hold on. All right, so she looked up and saw the huge rocky shape towering above the forest. Chapter 9, The Mountain. Roz was now stomping her way up the mountain. Dense forest and rocky outcrops forced the robot to zig and zag and backtrack. But after an hour of steady hiking, she arrived at the craggy mountain peak. Grasses and flowers and shrubs sprouted from every pocket of soil. But there were no trees at the top. Roz was safe from those annoying pine cones. She dusted herself off and carefully climbed up a leaning slab of stone to the very highest point of the entire mountain. And that top point of a mountain where you can't go any higher is called the summit. So when I climb mountains, my goal is to get to the summit so I can say I've been there, and then you start hiking back down.
Wait. Have you actually ever gone to the tippy top of the mountain? Mm-hmm. How did it look from above when you looked near what else was around?
When you're on the top of a mountain, it depends on many things. First thing, it depends on the weather. If it's really cloudy, sometimes you can't hardly see anything from the top of the mountain, and that's a bummer. If it's a really clear day, sometimes you can see, depending how high the mountain is, like 100 miles in every direction. So it just kind of depends.
So it would be nice if there was a mountain near a beach and you could see the beautiful sunset.
That would be true. I did summit a mountain in Hawaii that was kind of like that. Someday I'll have to show you pictures, but right now we got to keep it on topic. 2 more hands, we got to move on. Noah?
Is the air like thick or thin?
Up when you go up higher. The higher you go, the air becomes thinner. There's less oxygen available to you. That's why when people go hiking, sometimes you deal with altitude sickness. So that's another topic for another day. But if you go to climb a really tall mountain, you have to wait at a certain altitude to adjust in your body before you keep climbing. All right, last question.
There's something funny about Alexis, because when you say, Alexa, iParty show up, congratulations.
Yes, she does a bunch of goofy things. All right, but back to our story. She is climbing, and she's now to the very highest point of the mountain. The robot slowly turned her head completely around. She saw the ocean stretching to the horizon in every direction. And in that moment, Roz learned what you and I have known since the beginning of the story. In that moment, Roz finally realized that she was on an island. Roz looked down and surveyed the land. Starting from the sandy southern point, the island grew wider and greener and hillier until it finally jutted up to the rocky cone of the mountain. In some places, the mountain fell away, leaving sheer cliffs. A waterfall rushed off one cliff and fed a river that wound its way through a great meadow in the center of the island. The river flowed past wildflowers and ponds and boulders and then disappeared into the forest. I don't know about you, but that, if you made a mental movie, should have been beautiful. Blurry shapes suddenly cut through the robot's vision. She refocused her eyes and saw vultures circling above the foothills. Then she noticed lizards warming themselves on a distant rock. A badger peeked out from a berry bush. A moose waded through a stream. A flock of sparrows turned in perfect unison above the trees. The island was teeming with life. Teeming means full of. And now it had a new kind of life, a strange kind of life, artificial life. Now here is Roz at the top of our mountain peak. There she is.
I can't see.
It's a very simple picture. All you got to notice, she's at the very top of the mountain. Chapter 10. Very short chapter. The reminder. I should remind you, reader, that Roz had no idea how she had come to be on that island. She didn't know that she'd been built in a factory and then stored in a warehouse before crossing the ocean on a cargo ship. She didn't know that a hurricane had sunk the ship and left her crate floating on the waters for days until it finally washed ashore. She didn't know that she'd been accidentally activated by those curious sea otters. As the robot looked out at the island, it never even occurred to her that she might not belong there. As far as Roz knew, she was home. So she feels like, I woke up here, I was basically like kind of born here in her computer brain. She does not know anything that we know as the reader, right? Is it kind of fun when you as the reader know more than your character?
Yeah.
It is kind of fun. Chapter 11, The Robot Sleeps. Roz stood on the peak and watched the sun sink below the ocean. She watched shadows slowly spread over the island and up the mountainside. She watched the stars come out one by one until the sky was filled with 1,000,000 points of light. It was the first night of the robot's life. Can you imagine how beautiful that would be if you had never seen it? She activated her headlights, and suddenly bright shafts of light were beaming out of her eyes and illuminating the whole mountaintop. Too bright, so she dimmed them. Then she turned them off and sat in darkness and listened to the chorus of nighttime chirps. After a while, our robot's computer brain decided it was a good time to conserve energy. So she sat and anchored her hands to the rocks. Her non-essential program switched off, and then, in her own way, the robot slept. So it's kind of like when our Chromebooks go to sleep, right? They're still turned on, but they rest their screen, they turn their lights off, and they don't have to run all their programs. So she's saving energy. And last chapter today, chapter 12, The Storm. Now, we've talked about this a little. We said since she's metal, she could run into problems with being outside in the rain, right? We've talked about some of that. So think about what problems could lie ahead for her in a storm. Roz felt safe up on the mountaintop, so she spent the next few days and nights perched on the peak. But everything changed one afternoon when a low-flying cloud crept up the mountain, and Roz found herself surrounded by white. What was she surrounded by? Zoe?
Clouds or water?
Yeah, some sort of cloud or fog, right? She can't see. So she just called it white. When the world faded back into view, she noticed more clouds floating south past the island. Then she heard a deep rumble behind her. The robot turned her head around and saw that the sky was filled with a swirling wall of darkness. Lights flickered here and there. More deep rumbles. A storm was approaching, and it wasn't just any storm. It was as fierce as the one that had sent the cargo ship to the ocean floor. The wind picked up, and the first drops of rain tapped against the robot. It was time to go. Roz unclamped her hands and began sliding down the peak. Hot sparks flew from where her body scraped against the leaning slab of stone. As soon as her feet hit soil, she was off and running. The rain fell harder, the wind blew faster, the lightning flashed brighter, the thunder cracked louder. So much rainwater was falling that rushing rivers of runoff started springing up everywhere. Roz splashed down the mountain, surging through searching through the gloom for any kind of shelter. But she should have watched where she was going. Her heavy feet slipped and tripped, and she tumbled right into a mudslide. Our robot was helpless. The river of mud whisked her downhill, slammed her into rocks, and drug her through bushes and swept her straight toward a cliff. Mud was pouring off the cliff like a waterfall. Roz frantically clawed at the ground, grasping for anything she could hold on to. But the flow only carried her faster toward the edge. And just as she was about to plunge over the side, she came to a hard, sudden stop. Mud surged around her, spraying into her face and pinning her against some solid thing. She blindly felt with her hands and recognized the thick roots and trunk of a pine tree. In an instant, she was pulling herself up into the branches. The wind whipped across the mountainside, and Roz heard the familiar thunk of pine cones pelting her body. But she didn't mind them. She was just happy to be safe from the mud flow. The robot locked her arms and legs around the tree and waited for the storm to blow over. All right, now the last picture I skipped to show you is just of the storm. So here's the storm.
It must be waterproof.
So here it is. It's big, so I don't need to bring it all around. All right. Now we do need to stop reading for today. But my question is, we could predict if Roz can get out of the tree and all that, but we can probably decide this book's all about Roz. She probably does, right? So, thinking further ahead, what will be the challenges for Roz to face on the island, being a robot? Emma, give me one.
Predators?
Predators. Okay, now she's a robot. Do you think there could be animals on the island that could treat her badly?
Yeah.
Okay. And I don't even know if the animals will know that they can't eat her, right? She's not a person. She's not made out of animals, people, materials, right? She's a robot. All right, Angie?
Storms.
Storms. Okay, and we're going to learn more after this chapter how she can handle a storm. Hayden?
She might be waterproof though.
Okay, that would be nice, right? Cadence?
One of the most deadliest animals on an island can be monkeys.
It could be.
Can be what?
Do we know the climate of our island yet?
No. Well, maybe the.
Hey, class, we're still talking all together. Do we know the climate? I mean, like the temperature of our island. Do we know if it's a warm one or a cold one or anything, really?
It's a warm one.
We don't really know if it has seasons, right? We don't know if she's in the tropics. Okay, does the robot have to eat food?
No.
Okay, no. What is something, a resource from the island, the robot has to have in order to function? Eric?
Sun.
Sun, okay. What would happen if something covered up her solar panel? Noah?
She wouldn't be able to move or anything.
Yeah, she would basically shut down, right? Okay, I've got 3 more hands and we'll move on. 4 more hands. Liam?
I would love for us to be waterproof.
That'd be cool.
We are.
Angie?
I think Roz will shut down, but then the sun will come again and a beam of light will touch her solar panel and she'll be able to refunction again.
Okay, so you think that might be a problem down the road, but she'll be able to figure it out? Okay, Emma?
What if it's a storm, so the clouds are covering the sun? What if it's a cloudy day?
That's true. That's a good question. So solar panels work kind of when it's cloudy. They don't work as well as when it's sunny. So you can still get some solar power through a cloudy day, but not as much. But that's a great question. Noah?
I know nothing bad's gonna happen because there's a second book and we still have like.
Well, we do know, we can say that maybe her character survives, but we can't safely say nothing bad happens, right? Okay. Cadence? Shh, shh.
It's kind of like us. We need some lights to legs.
Yeah, if the sun stopped working for us, we wouldn't work out either, right? We all need lights. All right, thank you for joining. We will get back into our book tomorrow. See you then.